Hello, welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure to subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes short, and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for Shop, Look and Listen, released in 1940. It's the 311th in the series, and it's directed by Friz Freleng. You can find an unrestored version of this short on the Looney Tunes Mouse Chronicles Blu-ray set or DVD set. Either way, it's not restored, and at the time of this recording, it's not even available on streaming or anything like that, so hopefully they'll fix this one up. It is watchable, well, the visual quality at least. I mean, the short itself in terms of its humor and other things, yeah, that's another thing entirely, but we'll certainly go through it. But in case you haven't seen this one, it is under copyright, so you will not see this on YouTube unless Warner Brothers uploaded themselves, and I highly doubt it due to one gag within. But this is the second and final appearance of Little Blabbermouse, and he's on the J.T. Gimlet department store tour, which is being run by the W.C. Fields mouse that we've certainly seen before. And during the tour, we see a whole bunch of spot gags, and the W.C. Fields mouse keeps on being interrupted by a Little Blabbermouse. Now, before I get into the trivia, I'll let you know my good friend Essie McPeter, who is a frequent guest on this channel, he's going to chime in with a few thoughts all throughout. But I will go through the short from start to finish and go through all the trivia and so on, and yeah, he'll give his observations because he has one interesting theory about this short.
Hello everyone, this is SC here to talk about Chop, Look and Listen, released at the tail end of 1940, directed by Friz Freleng. And while the writer credit is Dave Monahan, I have a suspicion that this is Bugs Hardaway's brainchild. I'll get into that in just a little bit, but I'll be here to give some thoughts onto this rather inane, unfunny, but interesting cartoon.
I mentioned already, this is the second and final Little Blabbermouse short, and the other one was released this year, 1940, so why did they release two so close together, and they're all so familiar? In fact, there's even repeated animation from Little Blabbermouse, the previous cartoon, where the whole basket gets lifted up in the sky. Also, if you want to know the history regarding the W.C. Fields mouse and Little Blabbermouse and the comic book history and so on, definitely check out the review for Little Blabbermouse because I'm not going to repeat it here. But I will say that after this short, it's quite clear Little Blabbermouse, not really a character that took off. But interestingly enough, after this, Chuck Jones's character Sniffles would end up taking up a lot of the traits that Little Blabbermouse has. So pretty much a mouse that just won't stop talking, which leads to humorous situations, which, say what you want about Sniffles, but his later appearances are actually not that bad in my opinion. I think that sort of thing actually worked as opposed to the earlier appearances of Sniffles as this cutesy mouse in those Disney-esque shorts, which they look beautiful, and if you get that Mouse Chronicles set, you can see them all anyway. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the short from start to finish, and I'm going to go through all the references in order, because there's actually quite a few in here that's blink and you miss, but honestly, that's only if you're really paying attention, and given the humor, yeah, I can understand people maybe struggling to get through this one. If anything, the better gags are in Little Blabbermouse. At least that one has some ridiculous dad jokes, and this one just feels like they were really struggling for extra humor here. Because as the short opens up, it takes a long time for W.C. Fields' mouse to actually be seen. But we see the store, J.T. Gimlet, and that's a parody of the department store Gimbals. And if you want to go down a rabbit hole, a really interesting one, which I did when researching this, check out the history of Gimbals as a department store, their huge rise and their rapid fall. There's so many twists and turns in that history, definitely check it out. But from what I'm reading, the department store was closed in 1987. And naturally, the void has been filled by many other department stores that are now incredibly huge. But I never even heard of them because, well, I'm Australian and we've got our own department stores here that you guys in the US, if you're watching it, probably never even heard of.
So here we begin with the opening. We have Gimlet, it's closing, everything must go including Gimlet. Signs when it's open, if we were open Sundays. Almost a full minute of basically no animation until we see the W.C. Fields mouse. I think it's like 55 seconds of just static puns of the closing of Giblets, including two shoplifting gags, which is rather strange, but you may recognize this style of writing, static puns on backgrounds and sort of billboard style. This is something that Bugs Hardaway did a lot at Lance because that was a very low-budget studio, and that's the reason why Lance liked Hardaway and why he was the head writer there for so long, because he always had the solutions to keep down the cost. Because he was a cheap writer, his solution was always, let's just do a bunch of static puns. We won't have to animate them. It'll work. And Lance would go, oh, gee, that's great, Bugs. We'll do that. Put it right in that picture. And That's what I think. I think that the Blabbermouth cartoons were started by Hardaway before Freeling came back, but he wrote so many puns that they had to split them into two cartoons. Granted, I think some of the better ones, or at least they're done better here than in the first one, where here they play them out a little better, or at the very least try to weave them in better pacing rather than just, oh, pun this, pun that, here's some musical puns about the items you're seeing. Here there's actually, I guess there's a little bit more substance in how it's handled. There's some music, there's the puns, there's a bit more of the character rather than just always talking by the WC's Faust. But yeah, we get a nice low budget opening, which probably helped because one thing that makes up for the lack of substance with the jokes in these cartoons is that at the very least, they do look very nice. Even if this one hasn't been restored, I bet this one probably looks really good. Like Little Blabbermouth itself does. I rewatched both before I recorded this, and I thought, you know, these shorts do look pretty exceptionally good for Freeling around this time.
We see a shoplifting gag, so I guess in an era before metal detectors and other such technology, people would have easily been able to shoplift things out. But also, this was still the Great Depression, so maybe people were just stealing stuff because they had to. I don't know. If you have further information to put that shoplifting gag into context, definitely let me know. Like if Gimbals was actually severely targeted by shoplifters, if that was like a newsworthy thing at the time, yeah, definitely let me know because I'm genuinely curious. But what I do know is when we see on the bottom, in a note apparently by JT Gimlet himself, through these portals pass the most talented shoplifters in the world. So they even repeated a shoplifting gag already, which doesn't bode well for this short. Now, I believe that is a take on the Hollywood saying, through these portals pass the most beautiful girls in the world, and that's a quote famously used by Earl Carroll over at the entrance of his theatre in Hollywood. So that's where I believe that all comes from. And we still continue on with the entry of this store. I guess they're padding things out, where they go through the actual opening and closing times, and they even show Sundays. And a lot of stores would actually be closed on a Sunday. I'm not sure about the mega department stores, but the smaller ones usually would, especially in the smaller towns or the more rural towns anyway, because a lot of it, Sunday was seen as a day of going to church and being with family, that kind of thing. So we see the WC Fields mouse, we see the repeated animation, we just get right into it. There's not even an introduction like in Little Blabbermouth wanting to be on this tour and paying for it. No, we just get right into it.
You've probably all been on the usual tours to Niagara Falls, Yellowstone, and the Grand Canyon. Now I take you on an unusual tour. A tour that's new, that's different. I'd like to call your attention to the shoe department.
And we start the tour off with shoe puns. Yay. And you know it's a good short when you got this wonderful little pun here.
Of course, wherever you find a few good soles, you're bound to find a few heels. Yes, indeed.
Okay, I chuckled at that. It's stupid. I love it though. But we see a hosiery pun, and at the time, nylon stockings still weren't around. I believe they came onto the market a few years after this, but the stockings were made of silk, and one of the flaws of silk stockings was that sometimes there might be a flaw in the fabric, like a thread being pulled off, hence it's called a run. But of course, they play it up as a baseball pun. No runs, no hits, no errors. Of course they do. And we see the type of shoes. Now, I didn't actually get this, and I don't know if this is just an American thing, because I had to look this up. Because it goes through different type of shoes, which makes sense, you know, the suede shoes and so on, but then it says the mule shoes. And I didn't get it. And turns out that a mule shoe is a style of shoe that has no back or something to hold the foot's heel. But I never heard that term before, so I guess it must be a regional thing. Let me know if that's a commonplace term in North America, because yeah, I never even heard of that here, so well, there's something new. But naturally we're going to see mules, red and green, so at least they've got a variety of mules there. Ha ha. But my favorite bit of this whole short, honestly, is the next part, where we see that random mouse saying in a dopey voice, "It's amazing," after that one. I don't know.
It's amazing.
That is my favorite bit. Just a stupid, dopey mouse just saying that one line, which just tells you how great this short actually is. But whatever, at least I got something out of this, I suppose.
So now we're a little deeper into the cartoon. We've gone through some shoe puns, and we get this mouse sort of like the homely pig and Porky's hired hand here, where he just makes the dopey observation. And I think that might have been a Freeling contribution, because I think that the Gimlet opening was created by Bugs Hardaway for what was supposed to be one Blabbermouth cartoon that was, again, his version of Avery Spotgag cartoons with just constant puns. And it's clear he didn't recognize that you had to do substance, or at the very least play them out a little bit more than just pun, 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 which Freeling had to do here just so he could, well, keep it low budget, not have to spend too much time revising a lot of that, which I understand. Not every picture is going to be good, and I respect him for trying to make use of Hardaway's material. But here, at the very least, because it looks like he did it quite right enough for 2 cartoons, they play out some of the interaction here a little bit. Because after this, we also get a nice little exchange where little Blabbermouth, he keeps adding and adding his, I bet you haven't got that burbulated, etc. I bet you, which I liked a little bit. This isn't a funny cartoon, but I like that.
So the W.C. Fields Mouse goes off with the usual announcement of what a store offers, similar to what an elevator operator would say. You know, this floor, we've got some socks, this, that, whatever, you know, and then they go to the next.
Why, I haven't seen anything yet. Why, we have blocks, clocks, locks, socks, clippers, slippers, nippers, snippers, zippers.
Floor, you would have seen this many times in animated shorts. And then Blabbermouth counters that you haven't got certain items. Blabbermouth, by the way, was voiced by Mel Blanc, who does a wonderful job here despite the material he's given. And Bill Thompson does the voice of W.C. Fields Mouse. But I go through the whole Bill Thompson thing in the Little Blabbermouth review.
I'll bet you haven't got ventilators, mutilators, oscillators, insulators, percolators, refrigerators, tabulators, and excavators. I bet ya.
But at the end, and you might miss this because it goes by so quickly, the Blabbermouth says, I betcha, at the very end, and that is what the character Teeny, played by actress Marion Jordan, said in the radio show Fibber McGee and Molly, which was a hugely popular radio show at the time. So whenever you hear I betcha or something similar, that's what it's referring to. But it's interesting that some shots of this tour do not include certain mice characters, like the shot straight after the Little Blabbermouth saying I betcha, you then don't see that dopey mouse. So I'm guessing more shots were reused from Little Blabbermouth, again, to cut costs and just to fill a quota, I suppose. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but it's just something that I noticed. And we see the famous Whistler's mother painting. Well, what else is she going to do? Of course she's going to whistle, because what other gag are you going to think of?
You ought to hear my son. He's a whistler, too.
I mean, we've seen it before in Have You Got Any Castles, which is a short I would much rather be watching than this, but it's been done, and it will continue to be done. I've even seen it in some modern cartoons. How about that? But I do like the fact that she's whistling, she'll be coming around the mountain, and she even stops to say, you ought to hear my son, he is a whistler too. Okay, it's a stupid gag, but I do like the animation of her really getting into her whistling, so at least that's a nice one to see.
We get Whistler's mother, and she whistles, she'll be coming around the mountain, and she makes the just dumb observation that I really do suspect Hardaway put in the board. You know, my son's a whistler too, you ought to hear him, but I really like the rendition here. It's a nice little thing, and it's timed pretty well. And of course, she starts clapping along. It's nicely directed, so really kudos to him for putting it through and making good use of it. I wonder if there were any puns he cut. I have to mention there were a few that must have just been so bad that he didn't want to do. But then we also get The Thinker, which is also very well directed, because I do suspect in this case, Freeling or Dave Monahan must have added confidentially, I think. And then we get the camera pan out to show his taxes, which I'm sure the tax joke was always there if Hardaway had written this one. The camera really does save it from being just a bad pun, because you just think that dumb line is the final cut, and then you see, of course, his taxes. I'm thinking back to Daffy Duck and Egghead, because Mike Berry offered a scratch recording of that cartoon, and you can hear that there were a lot of punny lines that Hardaway written that were recorded but were ultimately cut from the film, for the better, of course. So yeah, Ben Hardaway, he really liked his puns, as I'm establishing all throughout this cartoon, but, you know, it's very nicely done here.
Then we see The Thinker, which is a famous sculpt that just about everyone knows of, even if they may not have seen the original, but they would have seen references all over the place. So he says, confidentially, I think, and that's a pun on Confidentially She Stinks, which is from the Frank Capra film You Can't Take It With You from 1938. What's also interesting here, and I think this is just a case of an error not being able to be corrected because of the money involved, but we see he has an income tax form. The distant shot shows 1939 taxes, but then as soon as we get to the close-up, it's 1940, so maybe they caught the error in time to do the close-up shot, but they couldn't redo the other shot. But the fact that it's 1939 taxes initially before it was fixed up tells me that this is probably another bit of evidence that the gags here were considered for Little Blabbermouth, which would be made earlier, so made in 1939, but then opted for this short, which was released much later, and all of the new stuff would have been animated during 1940. In any case, we do see a joke that I'm sure Tex Avery would have loved. Maybe they were inspired by Tex Avery from one of his Spot Gag shorts of 1940, because of how many times he's done something similar, where we see the painting of the hunter, and we see the dog getting all excited, and what's the painting next to him? The Lonesome Pine. Again, I'm sure Tex Avery would have loved that. I was trying to see if the paintings themselves were real, but when you look it up, and even if you narrow down the year and so on, there are many paintings called the hunter, and there are many paintings called the Lonesome Pine. But I'm also not a painting expert, so if you know more about such paintings, definitely let me know if there were real paintings that these would have had a basis on. I've seen some similar ones when I was doing my research, but it's not quite the same, so it's maybe a case of the adaptations here for the short being inspired by the real paintings, not being a literal translation of them. In any case, we now go to the last of his gag, which is more or less a gag reused from Frisch Freling's 1937 short, Sweet Sue, which isn't a particularly good short for many reasons, but the gag here, The Last of the Mohicans, that has its basis of a historical novel from 1826, and there were some film adaptations later on, a few of which were silent films, but this is perhaps referencing more famously the 1936 adaptation. Later in the years, we see other adaptations, and one maybe more people are familiar with is the Daniel Day-Lewis one from 1992, but that's what that comes from. It's a very tired gag, and you just shrug when you see it, I suppose.
Me, Mohican. Me, last Mohican.
But we continue on our tour, and we see an ashtray gag, which is what I call a nothing gag. It's like, okay, so W.C. Fields Mouse has got a cigar, so he decides to show off this new device, puts out the cigar, and it's just a robotic foot putting it out. Okay, sure. But you'll notice that there are a few gags here involving robotics, and there seems to be a bit of a theme in the late 30s, early 40s. There's a few shorts from various studios. My favorite one out of all of them would be Donald Duck's short Modern Inventions, where it's just all robotics. So there's definitely a bit of a theme there, and there would even be a trope in cartoons with mechanical cows, which, why cows, I don't know, but are definitely around. But as for the gag itself, again, it falls flat. But we go to the automatic poker table, and I thought this was funny despite of it, because why on earth would you even need this in your house? There are things called automatic shufflers where you put the cards in and it shuffles for you, but this takes it to an next extreme. I do like the added touch, though, where you got these 4 poker players, I guess, robotic poker players, but their tops spin as though it's showing that they are basically a moving robotic part. And, they didn't have to animate that bit, but, it adds to it at least. At least visually it looks nice.
The gags in this part where we listen to W.C. Fields Mouse and talking about these robots and the very unfun age of automated intelligence that we live in currently, it definitely aged very well in a very weird way.
Presenting now for your approval the new Super Deluxe 100% automatic poker table.
We get these gags about these automatic shufflers who can also demonstrate playing a game of poker, but of course one of them tries to cheat, and we get the really funny gag. I have to imagine this was added to pad out the cartoon, these robot gags, because even with all the puns, it feels like, again, they had to have more substance this one, which puts it above the other Blabbermouth cartoon, which is almost all puns. So here we get this nicely directed gag, which, again, these very mechanical gags are very well done by the animators. Not sure offhand who's doing them, but, there's the little nice slip under the collar. These robots, they need the collars to look like a shuffler, so of course that's where he's hiding his ace, and he gets shot by one of his comrades, which is funny. But I also do like some of the W.C. Mouse commentary, because he says, I want to have a hand just like that. Until, of course, we see that there's a 3 in there that he tries to replace. And again, he makes a funny comment about getting shot. And then right afterwards, he almost threatens to beat little Blabbermouse, which, yeah, that's probably some good venting from the staff there, having to put this cartoon through production.
But as soon as you see that one of the robotic players is about to cheat, well, the gun bit, you can predict it, but it's fine for what it is. It's completely ridiculous, but whatever. But because of the fact that one of the players tried to cheat, we have the W.C. Fields Mouse saying the line,
All it goes to prove you can't cheat an honest man. From the picture of the same name. Plug.
You can't cheat an honest man, and then he's saying that is from the movie of the same name. That is actually a film starring W.C. Fields. You can't cheat an honest man, and even says at the end, plug. So People would have perhaps been aware of that film at the time, but that's where that reference comes from.
But yeah, it's weird to me because while I was watching this part, I was laughing. I was like, hey, the short's about to end. And we get to the gift wrapping sequence. And the gift wrapping sequence, you know, it's nicely done. It's more automation. And then he just decides to wrap up Little Blabbermouse and Revenge. And it's a very soft ending. It just kind of happens.
And as we finish up, we see another unfunny gag involving an automatic ribbon clerk where there's a long build-up of the fact that, okay, which ribbon? Okay, I'll pick pink. And then this robot decides to just put the ribbon inside the box and that's it. Moving on, there's a wrapping machine, which I thought that the first machine would have done the wrapping, but I guess maybe that's the gag, but it's so poorly done, you just shrug. But the only gag here in the wrapping machine is that there's another robotic arm holding the knot, and that's it. There's just nothing to it. If indeed these gags were cut from Little Blabbermouse, there was a good reason for it. This bit just isn't funny at all. So Blabbermouse just starts babbling on after the whole gift wrapping scene, and he says,
Better than the telephone. Did Don Amici invent that too? Do it again, mister. Will you, huh? Will you, mister?
that appears to be a reference to Don Amici's role as Alexander Graham Bell in the movie of the story of Alexander Graham Bell, where it's about the telephone being invented. The whole last part of the short is W.C. Fields has had enough and gets Blabbermouse wrapped up, which I'm sure the audiences would have appreciated. You know, the whole thing is, okay, can we finally shut up this character? But after he gets wrapped up, little Blabbermouse is confused. Why are you doing this? I'll tell my father. And we get a nice little do not open till Xmas gag put over his mouth, a gag which we'll see repeated quite a few times throughout Looney Tunes history. So we end right there.
So we can finish the cartoon because there's no more gags to go through, thankfully. But yeah, I don't really have much to say on this one. I just wanted to talk about my little theory that Bugs Hardaway started this cartoon as well as the other cartoons Fraley did that have both Dalton and Hardaway's names in them. And that would make sense given the fact that offhand those cartoons like Porky's Baseball Broadcast and I know for sure Confederate Honey, those cartoons are very heavy in the puns, which is Hardaway's forte, as I mentioned. So I'd have to give this one a 6 out of 10. This isn't a go-to short, but it's very well produced, and it is a step above the other Blabbermouse cartoon. I wish I had more to say, but I really did enjoy talking about this, and I did enjoy revisiting them. Even if I don't particularly enjoy the cartoons, it's always nice just to ask myself, are these cartoons really as bad as I remember? And even if it really wasn't worth my time maybe to rewatch them to figure that out, you know, it is just nice to get confirmation and put them into words. So I'll see you on another review, everyone. That's all, folks.
Wow. I'm not saying Little Blabbermouse is a masterpiece, but that one is way more interesting than this one. At least that one has some of the most incredibly stupid dad jokes of all time, and I enjoyed it somewhat. It's not a great short, not one I would particularly recommend, and the two shorts illustrate why Little Blabbermouse and this W.C. Fields mouse character didn't really take off. This one just felt like they were really grasping at straws here. So I do believe that this short was made up of gags that were cut out from Little Blabbermouse and they just hastily added some wraparound stuff just to make a cohesive story. In fact, that's probably the only advantage here. There's a cohesive story. A few bits are chuckled at, some nice animation here. Musical puns are abound. I mean, you hear Home Sweet Home and a few other staples, but otherwise, average, 4 out of 10. I still would like to see this restored though. I think all those shots in the department store at night would look really nice restored. But otherwise, yeah, we finished 1940 on a very low note, but hey, we still had some highlights during this year. We had the first appearance of a certain rascally rabbit, for example, among other things. But it is a transitional year, 1940. You had Frisk Filling coming back, you had Bugs Bunny, you had Bob Clampett, he's going to finally start doing the color cartoons and so on. So we're now at that transition period, and I can't wait to start covering 1941. But that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
It's amazing.
Why did you do that? I'm going to tell my father. My father's a policeman. He's not afraid of anybody because he's a policeman. He can lick you and your whole family.